In the final years of the Pacific War, as the sun set over the restless waters east of the Philippines, a new kind of hunter began to prowl the night. These hunters did not stalk their prey by moonlight, nor by the faint silhouette of a warship drifting across the horizon. Instead, they used an invisible sense, an electronic eye capable of piercing darkness, rain squalls, and rolling fog. It was the American destroyer fleet, armed with surface search radar and trained to fight a kind of battle no navy had mastered before. Night combat guided not by sight, but by radio waves bouncing across the Black Pacific. The Japanese Navy had once been the uncontested master of night fighting. Their crews drilled relentlessly in visual attacks, using torpedoes and searchlights. But by 1943 and 1944, the balance of power at night had shifted. Radar, specifically the SG surface search radar fitted on U.S. destroyers, gave American ships a technological advantage that turned the night into a hunting ground. This is the story of how American destroyers used that advantage to stalk, track, and sink Japanese ships under the cover of darkness, changing the course of the naval war. To understand this evolution, we begin with men like Commander Arleigh Burke, Lieutenant Commander Frederick Moosbrugger, and countless radar operators whose names were never recorded but whose hands shaped the glowing scopes deep inside the destroyer combat information centers. These individuals were not merely sailors, they were practitioners of a new form of naval combat, one that blended instinct, training, and electricity into a deadly orchestration of speed and firepower. Radar was not simply a machine, it was a force multiplier. Operators could detect enemy ships long before lookouts could see them. The system could fix a target's bearing and range, even in pitch-black conditions. For the first time, American destroyers could fight at night with near-daylight clarity, while their opponents remained blind. The transformation began in the Solomon Islands. The waters around Guadalcanal had become a graveyard for cruisers and destroyers in 1942. Japanese night-fighting skill and their deadly Type 93 long-lance torpedoes inflicted severe losses. But as SG radar sets arrived in late 1942 and 1943, American destroyer divisions gained an unprecedented situational awareness. The Battle of Vella Gulf in August 1943 stands as one of the clearest demonstrations of radar-guided tactics in action. There, Commander Moosbrugger led a group of destroyers, Dunlap, Craven, and Maury, against an approaching Japanese reinforcement force. Moosbrugger trusted the radar completely. His ships tracked the Japanese destroyers before any visual contact was made. Every movement, every turn, every variation in speed appeared on the green-lit screens. The Americans launched torpedoes first, undetected, and struck decisively. 3 Japanese destroyers were sunk. American losses were 0. This battle taught an important lesson. Radar not only neutralized Japanese night superiority, it turned their own tactics against them.
Throughout 1944, night actions continued, but now the Americans refined their craft. Radar plotting rooms grew more sophisticated. Combat information centers were redesigned to integrate data from lookouts, radio intercepts, and radar displays. Destroyer captains began to think differently. Instead of fearing the night, they embraced it. They sought opportunities to fight after sunset, knowing radar gave them the initiative. When the U.S. Navy reached the Philippines, radar-equipped destroyers played a crucial role in the Battle of Surigao Strait, part of the larger Battle of Leyte Gulf in October 1944, the last battleship-to-battleship engagement in world history. But the destroyers fought their own war inside that larger conflict. As the Japanese Southern Force attempted to break through Surigao Strait, American PT boats and destroyers formed a gauntlet across the darkness. Radar picked up the Japanese formation long before they reached the American battle line. Destroyers like USS Benion, USS Killen, and USS Raymond used radar to fire torpedoes accurately at unseen targets. The Japanese battleship Yamashiro and other vessels sailed into a deadly web of radar-guided attacks. Torpedo after torpedo streaked in from American destroyers positioned deliberately along known approach routes. The outcome was devastating. By the time Yamashiro and her escorts reached the main American line, they were already crippled. Radar had turned the night into a trap. Yet perhaps the most dramatic example of radar-guided destroyer action occurred in the waters around the Philippines in late 1944 and early 1945. Japanese convoys attempting to resupply garrisons in Luzon and other islands were forced to travel by night, hoping to avoid air attack. But American destroyer squadrons, now highly trained, experienced, and aggressive, relentlessly hunted these convoys using radar. One of the most lethal formations was Destroyer Squadron 23, known as the Little Beavers, led by Captain Arleigh Burke. His flagship, USS Charles Osborne, often steamed at flank speed through narrow passages, guided only by radar operators calling out contacts through the intercom. The squadron's radar screens painted a real-time map of the ocean, displaying not just enemy ships, but also American formations, reefs, and islands. During the Battle of Cape St. George in November 1943, Burke's destroyers used radar to detect and intercept a group of Japanese destroyers evacuating troops from Buka Island. The Americans approached silently, firing torpedoes and opening gunfire with precision. The Japanese attempted evasive maneuvers, but they were reacting to invisible hunters. 3 Japanese destroyers were sunk, 1 was heavily damaged, and no American ship was hit. This battle became a textbook example of radar-directed night combat. But radar was only one part of the equation. It required skilled operators. These men, often working in cramped, dimly lit rooms deep inside the ship, needed to interpret fuzzy blips on the screen. They distinguished between wave clutter, false echoes, and genuine contacts. Some could tell the difference between a destroyer and a larger vessel, based on the intensity and width of the return. They called out range to the bridge, adjusted filters, and maintained track even during evasive maneuvers. Many captains relied more on their radar operators than on their lookouts. It was a tremendous responsibility placed on young sailors, some barely 19 years old. In many after-action reports, destroyer skippers credited radar operators with preventing collisions, detecting ambushes, and enabling perfectly timed torpedo attacks.
The Japanese Navy, for its part, struggled to counter this new reality. Their early radar sets were unreliable and often not fitted on destroyers. Night combat doctrine had emphasized visual detection, a method that worked brilliantly early in the war, but became a fatal liability once radar proliferated among American ships. Even the famous Long Lance torpedo, a weapon unmatched in range and power, lost much of its advantage when American destroyers could detect and maneuver against Japanese formations before the torpedoes were ever launched. Many Japanese commanders, unsure whether they were being tracked, resorted to unpredictable zigzag patterns and sudden course changes. But radar erased the element of surprise. Once a Japanese formation entered the radar envelope of an American destroyer group, the Americans could shadow them quietly, adjusting their own movements without ever turning on searchlights or breaking radio silence. In effect, radar created a one-sided battlefield. By 1945, this method of hunting had become routine. Off the coast of Okinawa, American destroyer picket stations used radar to track kamikaze aircraft, but they also hunted Japanese surface vessels attempting desperate nighttime sorties. Small Japanese escorts, freighters, and torpedo boats attempted to slip through American lines, only to be intercepted miles away by destroyers tracking them on radar. In several engagements, American ships located and destroyed entire convoys without ever visually sighting them until the final moments.
One particularly telling engagement occurred when an American destroyer division intercepted a Japanese coastal convoy attempting to move troops along the Luzon coastline. The American commander ordered his ships to run parallel to the coastline at night, using radar to detect small craft attempting to cling to shallow waters. Radar operators reported clusters of returns, barges, landing craft, and escort vessels. The destroyers closed in silently, firing star shells only at the last second to confirm targets. The Japanese, caught completely off guard, scattered. Many never realized how they had been detected. The technological leap was profound. The SG radar had a maximum range of about 15 nautical miles for surface contacts, though practical use often hovered around 8 to 10 miles depending on weather. More importantly, it had excellent resolution. Operators could distinguish between multiple ships sailing in formation. This precision allowed American destroyer groups to coordinate torpedo attacks with remarkable accuracy. Instead of launching torpedoes into uncertain locations, they could target precise tracks. And because they could maintain track even after turning or maneuvering, American destroyers could stage multi-directional attacks, something the Japanese could rarely defend against at night. As these tactics matured, destroyer captains adopted a standard approach: maintain radar contact at a distance, determine the enemy's course, increase speed to gain a favorable firing angle, launch torpedoes based purely on radar data, and then close the range for gunfire. This was the exact opposite of pre-war doctrine, which had emphasized visual identification before engagement. Now, the first phase of battle was fought in the dark, guided by instruments, with human eyes only confirming the kill at the end. One of the most remarkable aspects of radar-guided warfare was the shift in command style. Previously, captains controlled all aspects of ship maneuvering, relying on bridge lookouts and their own judgment. But with radar, the Combat Information Center became the brain of the ship. Captains increasingly depended on plotters and operators in rooms they could not see. Decisions were based on voices emerging through intercoms, young men announcing bearings, ranges, speeds, and suggested maneuvers. This trust between bridge and radar room became a defining characteristic of American destroyer operations in the late war. Many radar operators, when interviewed after the war, recalled the intense pressure of combat. The room was small, lit only by the faint glow of screens. Sweat collected on the palms of operators as they adjusted dials and kept their eyes fixed on elusive contacts. Some described the mental exhaustion of maintaining constant track for hours as the ship closed in on targets. But they also remembered the thrill, knowing they were the eyes of the ship in a world where sight had become useless. By the war's end, radar had become so central to American destroyer operations that it was hard to imagine night combat without it. The U.S. Navy had turned technology into strategy, and strategy into battlefield dominance. What had begun as a desperate attempt to counter Japanese night superiority had evolved into a methodical, confident approach that allowed American destroyers to hunt Japanese ships with ruthless efficiency. When Japan surrendered in August 1945, many officers credited radar and the destroyers that wielded it with saving countless lives and accelerating the end of the war. Without radar, American forces would have faced far greater losses in the Solomons, the Philippines, and around Okinawa. Radar had not only altered battles, it had transformed naval warfare itself. The legacy of these radar-guided night actions extends far beyond World War II. Modern naval combat still relies heavily on electronic detection and engagement systems, though vastly more advanced. But the foundation was laid by the experiences of American destroyers in the Pacific. Ships like USS Fletcher, USS Charles Osborne, USS Maori, and countless others whose crews learned to fight in darkness with confidence, precision, and audacity. In the end, the story of how American destroyers used radar to hunt Japanese ships at night is a story of adaptation. It is a story of sailors learning to trust machines that could see what they could not.
It is a story of commanders willing to embrace new tactics and abandon old assumptions. And it is a story of the Pacific War itself, a war defined by innovation under pressure. The Black Pacific Nights that once favored the Imperial Japanese Navy eventually became the battleground where radar turned the tide. And long after the last shells splashed into the sea, the lessons of those night battles remain etched in naval history.